Genghis Khan, from outcast to conqueror. Hello everyone. Today I'm going to tell you a story about one of the most powerful and talked about leaders in history, Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire. His life is like a movie full of struggle, betrayal, survival, and extraordinary vision. This is not just a story about a military commander, it's a story about how a boy, born into chaos and poverty, became one of the most influential men the world has ever known, conquering more territory than anyone in history. So sit back, relax, and listen carefully, because this story will not only improve your English, but also inspire you to believe that no matter where you come from, you can achieve greatness if you have the courage to dream bigger than your circumstances. Let's start with his childhood, where it all began. The boy who was born into a brutal world. Temujin, that was his real name, not yet Genghis Khan, was born around 1162 in the harsh steppes of Mongolia. The exact year isn't known because the Mongols didn't keep detailed records like other civilizations, but what we do know is that he entered a world of violence, tribal warfare, and constant struggle for survival. Imagine being born not in a city or a village with walls and protection, but in the vast, endless grasslands where temperatures could drop below freezing and danger lurked at every corner. Temujin's father was named Yasuji, a minor tribal leader who belonged to the Kiot clan. His mother was Holin, a strong woman who would prove to be one of the most important influences in her son's life. Unlike the privileged children of powerful kings or emperors, Temujin wasn't born into wealth or security. His family lived in constant fear of raids and attacks from neighboring tribes. The Mongol steppes weren't a unified place. They were divided into dozens of warring clans and tribes, each fighting for grazing lands, resources, and power. There was no central government, no laws that protected people, no safe place where families could rest without fear of being attacked in the middle of the night. When Temujin was only 9 years old, his life changed in the most tragic way. His father, Yasuji, was poisoned by members of a rival tribe called the Tartars. This wasn't an accidental death or a battle injury, it was a deliberate act of revenge. Yasuji had once defeated the Tartars, and they never forgot it. They waited for their moment, and when Temujin's father was traveling alone, they struck him down and killed him. This single act shattered Temujin's childhood. Imagine what it felt like for a 9-year-old boy to lose his father, his protector, his guide, in a world where survival depended on strength and tribal connections. Without Yasuji, Temujin's family lost their status immediately. Other tribes that had once respected them now saw them as weak, as an easy target. Temujin's family was cast out from the clan and left to fend for themselves on the steppes. His mother, Holin, had to somehow keep her children alive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Life became a constant struggle for survival. Temujin and his family had almost nothing. While other children in the tribe had warm shelters, regular meals, and the protection of a large clan, Temujin often went hungry. He had to help his mother find food in the frozen wastelands. There were days when they ate animals that other people wouldn't touch, days when they had to hide from raiders, days when death seemed closer than tomorrow. But this suffering taught Temujin something crucial. He learned that in this world, weakness meant death. He learned that the only way to survive was to be smarter, faster, and more determined than everyone else. The making of a survivor. When Temujin was about 13 years old, something happened that showed his character and his determination to survive at all costs. A neighboring tribe called the Merkits had a grudge against Temujin's father. Years earlier, Yasuji had stolen a woman named Holin from them to be his wife, Temujin's mother. The Merkits decided to take revenge by kidnapping Temujin and holding him captive. For a young boy, this was a terrifying experience. He was imprisoned in a wooden cart used to carry prisoners, guarded by warriors with no hope of escape. Imagine being 13, separated from your family, locked away, knowing that your captors wanted revenge against your dead father. But Temujin didn't give up. He watched the guards carefully, studied their patterns, and waited for the right moment. One night, when the guards were distracted, he managed to escape from the cart and fled into the darkness. He ran through the night, hiding in rivers and tall grass, using every trick he could think of to avoid being caught. When he finally reunited with his family, he had proven something important. He had the courage and intelligence to survive impossible situations. This escape taught Temujin a critical lesson. Physical strength alone wasn't enough. He needed to understand people, to observe them carefully, to think ahead of his enemies. He needed strategy. Around this same time, something else happened that would change the course of his life. A young man named Jamuka entered Temujin's world. Jamuka was from a noble family, charismatic and intelligent, and he and Temujin became close friends and blood brothers. They hunted together, shared stories, and dreamed about the future. Jamuka seemed to understand the kind of vision Temujin was developing, the idea that the divided tribes of Mongolia could be united. For a few years they were inseparable, and it seemed like they would change Mongolia together. But as they grew older, their friendship faced a terrible test. Both men began gathering followers and building power bases. What started as friendship gradually turned into competition. Jamuka wanted to become the leader of all Mongolia, and so did Temujin. Eventually, their paths diverged completely, and Jamuka joined forces with rival tribes against Temujin. The betrayal was crushing. Temujin had trusted Jamuka completely, and Jamuka had betrayed him. This betrayal would stay with Temujin for the rest of his life, reminding him that in the world of power and politics, even the closest friendships could shatter. Building an army from nothing. In his early 20s, Temujin began a process that nobody had ever attempted before in Mongolia. He tried to unite the warring tribes. This seems simple when we think about it now, but in the context of Mongolian society, it was revolutionary. The tribes had fought each other for centuries. Their conflicts were based on blood feuds, territorial disputes, and tribal pride. Every tribe believed they were superior to the others. The idea of uniting them under a single leader seemed impossible, like trying to gather a pack of wild wolves and making them work together. But Temujin had a vision that other tribal leaders didn't have. He didn't want to just raid and conquer in the traditional way. He wanted to create a system, a structure, an empire. To do this, he needed an army, and armies need to be loyal, organized, and strong. Temujin began by gathering followers. Some were warriors who had heard of his courage and wanted to serve under a leader who had a real plan. Others were refugees and outcasts, people like himself who had nothing to lose and everything to gain from joining his cause. Temujin had a remarkable ability to attract people. He wasn't born into ultimate power like other tribal leaders, which meant he couldn't command people through birthright. Instead, he had to inspire them, had to make them believe in his vision, had to convince them that following him was better than anything else they could do. One of his first major followers was a man named Borta. Actually, Borta was a woman, but not just any woman. She was Temujin's wife, and she became one of his most trusted advisors and supporters. Borta had been kidnapped by the Merkits, the same tribe that had kidnapped Temujin years earlier, and when Temujin rescued her, he married her and she became the mother of his children. but more importantly, she became his confidant and strategic partner. Another crucial follower was Jamaka. Yes, his former best friend, but more importantly, it was Jamaka's betrayal that taught Temujin about the importance of loyalty. When people joined Temujin's army, he demanded absolute loyalty, but he also offered something in return: fair treatment, a share of the spoils, and most importantly, a chance to be part of something greater than themselves. Temujin implemented a revolutionary system for his army. In traditional Mongol warfare, soldiers were organized by tribe and family. Warriors followed their tribal leaders, and loyalty was based on blood relations. Temujin changed this completely. He reorganized his army based on merit and ability, not on tribal connections. If a warrior was skilled and loyal, he could rise through the ranks regardless of his family background. If a tribal leader didn't meet Temujin's standards, he could be replaced, even if he came from a noble family. This was shocking to Mongolian society, but it created an incredibly efficient and effective military machine. The consolidation of power. By his early 30s, Temujin had defeated many rival tribes, but complete unification was still far away. In 1206, he called a Kurultai, a gathering of all the Mongol tribes that recognized his leadership. At this gathering, the assembled chieftains officially proclaimed Temujin as their supreme leader and gave him a new title, Genghis Khan, which means universal ruler or ruler of all. Can you imagine the weight of that moment? A man born into poverty and outcast status was now proclaimed the ruler of all the Mongols. This wasn't just a tribal leadership. This was the foundation of an empire. But here's what's important to understand. Genghis Khan didn't rest on his laurels. He didn't celebrate and then relaxed into his new position. Instead, he immediately began the work of creating the structure and rules that would hold his empire together. He created a written code of laws called the Yasa, which applied to all people in his empire, regardless of their tribe or background. The Yasa covered everything from military discipline to commerce to family relations. Importantly, Genghis Khan included laws that prohibited unnecessary violence and waste. He wanted his people to focus their energy on conquest and building, not on internal feuding. One of the most revolutionary aspects of Genghis Khan's rule was his attitude toward religion and culture. The Mongol steppes had many different religions: Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, and traditional Tengrism. Rather than forcing everyone to believe what he believed, Genghis Khan allowed religious freedom as long as people paid their taxes and showed loyalty to him. This was incredibly progressive for the time. It meant that people from many different backgrounds could be part of his empire, and their differences wouldn't create division. Genghis Khan also understood the power of information and communication. He established a famous postal system called the Yam, which allowed messages to travel quickly across the empire. Riders could change horses at predetermined stations, allowing messages to travel dozens of miles per day. This meant that Genghis Khan could receive reports from distant parts of his growing empire and send orders back quickly. In an age before telegraphs or radios, this was a revolutionary technology. The conquest begins. Once Genghis Khan had unified the Mongol tribes, he turned his attention outward. He looked beyond the steppes at the great civilizations that surrounded Mongolia: the Jin dynasty in China, the Islamic Khwarezmian Empire, and the kingdoms of Central Asia. These civilizations were wealthy, had advanced technologies like gunpowder and siege weapons, and had seemed invulnerable for centuries, but Genghis Khan saw them as opportunities. In 1205, Genghis Khan had already begun raiding the Jin dynasty in China, but after his official proclamation as supreme ruler in 1206, he launched a full-scale invasion. This was a massive undertaking. The Jin dynasty had millions of people and a sophisticated military. The Mongols, by comparison, were a smaller force, But they had something the Jin dynasty didn't have: mobility, superior tactics, and a leader who understood how to use psychological warfare.
The Mongol invasion tactics were brilliant and terrifying. Mongol soldiers were expert horsemen. Many of them had been riding horses since childhood. They could cover vast distances quickly, appearing suddenly where they were least expected. Genghis Khan used deception and intimidation as weapons. Before attacking a city, he would send emissaries offering the city a choice: surrender and be treated fairly, or resist and face complete destruction. Many cities surrendered without a fight because they believed the stories of Mongol ferocity. And when a city did resist, Genghis Khan made sure to completely destroy it as an example to other cities. It sounds brutal, and it was, but it was also effective. The psychological impact of this strategy meant that many cities surrendered quickly, saving lives in the long run. The conquest of the Jin dynasty took decades, but by 1234, the Jin dynasty had completely fallen to Mongol rule. This was an enormous achievement. Genghis Khan had conquered one of the largest empires in the world. But Genghis Khan wasn't satisfied with just conquering China. His ambitions were even larger. In 1219, he turned his attention west, toward the Islamic Khwarezmian Empire. The Shah of Khwarezm had insulted Genghis Khan by executing Mongol envoys, which was a grave mistake. Genghis Khan launched an invasion that became one of the most devastating military campaigns in history. The Mongol armies swept across Central Asia, conquering city after city. The speed of the conquest was shocking. In just a few years, the Mongol Empire stretched from China in the east to the borders of Europe in the west. The characteristics of a military genius. What made Genghis Khan so successful as a military commander? There were several key factors. First, he understood that successful conquest wasn't just about military strength, it was about logistics. Genghis Khan realized that armies needed food, weapons, and supplies to function. He developed supply lines and logistic systems that allowed his armies to stay in the field for months or even years. This was something many armies of the time didn't do well. Second, Genghis Khan was willing to adopt new technologies and tactics from the people he conquered. When he faced the Jin dynasty with their advanced siege weapons, he incorporated those technologies into his own army. He used spies and scouts to gather intelligence about his enemies. He adapted his tactics based on the terrain and the nature of his opponents. He wasn't rigidly attached to the old Mongol way of doing things. He was constantly learning and improving. Third, Genghis Khan had an almost supernatural ability to inspire loyalty in his followers. He treated his soldiers well compared to other commanders of the time. He shared the spoils of war fairly. He promoted people based on ability rather than birth. When soldiers were wounded in battle, he made sure they received care. These things might seem obvious to us today, but they were revolutionary in the medieval world. Soldiers wanted to fight for Genghis Khan because he valued them as human beings, while also being ruthlessly effective as a commander. Building an empire, not just a kingdom. Here's what separated Genghis Khan from other great conquerors. He didn't just want to conquer territory, he wanted to build an empire that would last. He established systems of government, taxation, and administration that could manage vast territories and diverse populations. He appointed governors and officials based on merit. He ensured that different regions could maintain some of their own customs and traditions as long as they paid taxes and showed loyalty to the Khan. Genghis Khan also understood trade and economics. Rather than just extracting wealth from conquered territories through force, he encouraged commerce. He understood that if people could trade safely and profitably, they would generate wealth that could be taxed. He famously established the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, which was a system of relative stability and security across the Mongol Empire. This allowed merchants to travel safely from Europe to China, trading goods and sharing ideas. The Silk Road flourished during this period, and the wealth that flowed through these trade routes was shared with the Mongol Khan. Personal life and character. Beyond the military and political achievements, Genghis Khan was a complex human being with personal qualities that were both admirable and brutal. He was intensely loyal to those who served him faithfully, but he was equally ruthless toward those who betrayed him or resisted his authority. When his former blood brother Jamuka eventually was captured, Genghis Khan had him executed, not out of personal anger, but as a strategic decision to eliminate a rival and show the consequences of opposing him. Genghis Khan had a large family and many children. He believed in the importance of succession and spent considerable time training his sons and grandsons to lead parts of the empire. Unlike some rulers who saw their children as threats to their power, Genghis Khan invested in their development as leaders. His sons became powerful Khans in their own right, and his grandsons extended the empire even further after his death. Genghis Khan was also known for his personal interests beyond warfare and conquest. He enjoyed hunting and saw it as both recreation and training for warfare. He was fascinated by different cultures and religions he encountered. He had a sense of humor, though it was often dark and tied to the violent nature of the world he inhabited. Those who knew him described him as both charismatic and terrifying. People were drawn to him, but also deeply afraid of him. The later years and legacy. Genghis Khan didn't rest as he aged. He continued to lead military campaigns well into his 60s, which was exceptionally old for a warrior in that era. He expanded the Mongol Empire until it became the largest contiguous land empire in history. At its height, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean in the east to Eastern Europe in the west, covering approximately 24 million square kilometers. That's roughly the size of Africa, all under the control of a single leader who had been born an outcast on the steppes.
In 1227, Genghis Khan died, probably around the age of 65. The circumstances of his death are not entirely clear. Some accounts say he was injured in a hunting accident, others say he died of illness. What is clear is that his death marked the end of an era, but not the end of the empire he created. His sons and grandsons continued to rule and expand the empire after his death, proving that Genghis Khan had built a system that could outlast him. The controversial legacy. It's important to acknowledge that Genghis Khan's legacy is complicated and controversial. On one hand, he was a military genius who unified a fragmented people and created an empire that facilitated trade, communication, and cultural exchange across the Eurasian continent. The Mongol Empire created relative peace across vast territories, allowing merchants and ideas to flow freely. This led to technological advancement, cultural development, and economic growth in many regions. On the other hand, Genghis Khan's conquests were accompanied by tremendous violence and death. Estimates suggest that the Mongol conquests may have resulted in the deaths of tens of millions of people. Cities that resisted were completely destroyed. Entire populations were sometimes eliminated. The brutality was staggering, even by the standards of medieval warfare. However, it's important to understand this brutality in historical context. Genghis Khan lived in a brutal world where violence was the norm. His tactics, while devastating, were actually often more effective and less prolonged than the traditional warfare of the time. By using psychological warfare and destroying cities that resisted, he often shortened wars that might have otherwise lasted decades. The cities that surrendered were generally treated fairly, which is why so many cities chose to surrender rather than fight. In a dark way, Genghis Khan's ruthlessness was sometimes more merciful than lengthy conflicts would have been. So what can we learn from the life of Genghis Khan? There are several important lessons that apply to anyone seeking to achieve greatness. First, your circumstances don't determine your destiny. Genghis Khan was born into poverty and outcast status. He lost his father at a young age and faced constant rejection and violence. But none of this stopped him from achieving extraordinary things. His starting point was incredibly harsh, but he refused to let his past limit his future. If you're facing difficult circumstances today, remember that they don't have to define you. Second, vision is more powerful than tradition. Everyone in Mongolia accepted that the tribes would always be divided and at war with each other. This was just how it had always been. But Genghis Khan imagined something different, a unified Mongolia with shared laws and a common purpose. This vision was revolutionary because almost no one else could see it. In your own life, don't accept the limitations of what has always been done. Imagine something better, something different, and have the courage to pursue it. Third, loyalty and fairness are more powerful than fear and force. While Genghis Khan was ruthless to his enemies, he was fair to his followers. He promoted people based on ability, shared spoils fairly, and treated his soldiers well. This created fierce loyalty. People wanted to follow him not just because they were afraid of him, but because they believed in him. If you're leading a team or organization, remember that people will follow you further and work harder for you if they believe you're fair and if they have a real stake in the success you're pursuing. Fourth, adaptation is key to survival and success. Genghis Khan didn't rigidly stick to one way of doing things. He learned from his enemies, adopted new technologies, and adjusted his tactics based on circumstances. In today's rapidly changing world, the ability to adapt and learn is crucial. Don't get locked into one way of thinking or one way of doing things. Fifth, systems are more important than individuals. Genghis Khan created administrative systems, military structures, and laws that could outlast him. He trained his successors to lead effectively. This is why his empire continued after his death. If you're building something, whether it's a business, an organization, or a movement, don't make it dependent on yourself alone. Build systems and develop people who can carry your vision forward. Conclusion. Genghis Khan's journey from a frightened boy on the steppes to the ruler of the largest empire in history is nothing short of remarkable. He faced rejection, betrayal, poverty, and violence. He lost his father, his freedom, his tribe. By every measure, his circumstances suggested that he should have remained an outcast, struggling to survive in the harsh Mongolian wilderness. But Genghis Khan had something more powerful than favorable circumstances. He had vision, determination, and an unwavering belief that he could unite his people and change the world. He had the intelligence to learn from his enemies and the courage to do what others thought was impossible. He understood that true power came not just from conquering territory, but from creating systems that could organize millions of people towards a common purpose. Whether you admire him or are troubled by the violence that accompanied his conquests, one thing is undeniable: Genghis Khan changed history. He proved that an individual with vision and determination could reshape the world. He showed that birth and circumstances don't have to determine your destiny. He demonstrated that the most powerful force in the world is an idea, the idea that things can be different, that people can be unified, that greatness is possible. As we conclude this incredible story, remember the lessons Genghis Khan's life teaches us. Your starting point doesn't matter. What matters is your vision, your determination, and your willingness to do what others think is impossible. If you dream big, work hard, and stay focused on your goals, there is no limit to what you can achieve. The boy born into poverty on the Mongolian steppes became the ruler of the world's largest empire. What will you become?